I definitely took inspiration from the Book of Jesuits, where there's the Jesuit account of when my people were torturing Brebeuf, and that's for real. I always thought it was a really good telling of how my people dealt with our enemies, and I always, like, me and my cousins read it for fun.
It's a really good story.
It is a good story. It's
warms
funny.
the heart. Just warms the heart.
So I was like, man, we were brutal, and I loved that. So that was a huge inspiration. There was inspiration. I was inspired by Home Alone. I was inspired by Shaun of the Dead. The Shaun of the Dead aspect would be just the violence, like the extreme violence, but then it's grounded in reality. Like what these two normal people would do in this crazy situation like that. And then Clear Cut, just because Graham is so epic in that, and you want to... I felt like it was the first time I got to see an Indigenous person that I could cheer on, you know, watching him debark that guy who was the guy in charge of the deforestation, but he got to get revenge, and that to me is something that you never got to see before. And I used to watch that when I was like 6 years old. So when I first met Graham, we worked on a show for the Sci-Fi Network called Defiance, and everybody was going up to him, oh my God, I love Dances with Wolves, all this stuff. And then I was like, hi, I'm from Kanien'kehá, and I just want you to know that I grew up watching Clear Cut. And he was like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah. So there was lots of inspiration from that movie, and yeah, I just liked our people's history, and I just wanted it to be fun.
I think it's important to recognize that in many ways it's like a narrative descendant of Clear Cut. It's also in the same realm as far as impact, which I see is like kind of the impact of experiencing Rhymes for New Goals by Jeff Barnaby. Like, it's a leap forward watching it. Me as a native, I was in it, but as a viewer watching it, it's like I see that this film is a leap forward for narrative storytelling, for storytelling from an Indigenous perspective, and really opens up a lot of doors as far as how we express ourselves as Native peoples. And I think connecting to Clear Cut, I mean, there's something so empowering even about the display of righteous rage from an Indigenous lens. That is to see that on the screen, unabashedly righteous rage is something that really connects deep. And I think that I'm really looking forward to Native communities to watch this, because, you know, Kaniehtiio is a star in her own right, but she's also the pinnacle, the contemporary pinnacle of Indigenous matriarchy.
Oh, thank you.
And
I
she
think
deserves
the hardest.
her limelight.
Oh, thank you. Oh, love you. I think the interesting thing for me, hearing reviews and hearing some of the takes on it, and even when we were before shooting, some of the things I had to convince people of was the tone. People didn't seem to trust that it was. The people are like, well, is it a horror? And I'm like, well, there are horrific things that are happening. They want to destroy our way of life. You know, that's horrific to me. That's horror. There's blood in it. You know, there's violence. That to me is also horror. And then there's, you know, like the home invasion. It's obviously a home invasion. It's thriller because it's fast paced, and it's comedy. And I'm not saying I'm not saying I think a lot of Indigenous people got the tone and get it from the beginning, from the get-go, and especially it was especially helpful to have a lot of Indigenous people on the crew, because they were like, oh, yeah, this is fucking hilarious. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, see, it's not just me. And so it was very reassuring to have a lot of Indigenous people. I had these trainees come up from Kanien'kehá, and they got it. And that was, I didn't have to convince them of it. And I feel like some people, they're just looking at it through a specifically horror lens, you know, or a specifically thriller lens. And if they look at it like that, they won't be able to, they think it's inconsistent, you know what I mean? But for me, when I'm told a story, even by somebody in my community, these kind of crazy twists and turns happen, and you're basically laughing the whole way through, and then you're like, oh my God, yes, get him, you know? And then so I don't know if that's Indigenous storytelling or if it's just the way I'm telling the story, but I felt like I didn't need to convince you of anything. There were some people on the crew that I was just like, you need to just trust me on this one, you know? And then when it was played out, they were like, oh, I get it now. So it's been interesting. I don't know, what do you think? Do you think it's like an Indigenous storytelling thing, or do you think it's...
It resonated with me right off the bat, right? Like I never had questions about the tone because it came across to me right from the get-go. So it was really amazing to see that the crew, for the most part, everyone got it, and they were on board. And it was one of the most relaxed sets I've ever worked on that was just 100% collaborative, where people were just supportive of each other, no stress. It was just a great experience overall to film this project. And everyone was giving it their best. I think it comes across so well. Yeah. I mean, this film looks way more expensive than it was. Yeah. And that's just, a nod to all the amazing people during production and post-production who really made this the gem that it is. As far as like the story and the tone, I think it really just, it puts on display like the eclectic nature of living in Native communities where you have to deal with such high dramatics, from comedy to drama to horror all in one day.
To trauma, yeah.
And so I think it carries that. It carries that tone that we are very much multifaceted people living in a multifaceted world with a whole series of different baggages. And I think the film does a good job of kind of conveying that.